to start recording. So this talk today is the power of unconventional beliefs. And I'm going to be talking to you about, firstly, what are unconventional beliefs. I'm going to be talking to you also about beliefs and why beliefs are really the thread or the keystone that you want to play with if you're looking to innovate or you're looking to experience life in a different way. And then I'm going to give you the kind of 5 keys to trailblazing with unconventional beliefs so that you can take that away and you can get started. And so you might be wondering, well, why am I qualified to talk about this? Well, I'm a master hypnotist, so I left my career as a consultant almost 7 years ago because I decided that I didn't want to work for someone else anymore, and I was bored of not seeing strategies properly implemented and change really being created, and a lot of talk about innovation but not true innovation, and I went off and trained as a master hypnotist. And so now what I do in my business working with people is that yes, we can look at strategy, we can look at tactics, we can look at process, but actually when we drop into the belief systems people have and we play at a belief system level, that's where we're able to create the greatest change for people. It's almost as if you imagine a set of dominoes. If you were to come to each domino and knock it over, i.e. changing a certain behavior or a certain idea, you can get so much more traction by going right to the beginning of that domino thread, just knocking that first one over, and then everything changes. And that's what actually happens when you start playing with beliefs. So come on in, come join us. We're just getting started, so just come grab a seat. Hello, I recognise you.
Yeah.
How are you doing?
Good, how are you?
Yeah, very, very well, thank you. So when I talk about unconventional beliefs, what are unconventional beliefs? Well, let's talk about the 3 types of beliefs and the way that we can group them. So you're probably all familiar with the term limiting beliefs. If you do any kind of personal development, if you listen to podcasts, etc., there's limiting beliefs. And what they do for us is they obviously keep us quite contracted. They keep us stuck. If we've got a limiting belief, that is often what is one of the things that's stopping us at a subconscious level from us being able to move towards the goal or the outcome that we want to create. So we have limiting beliefs. If we shift those limiting beliefs, we can move into a place where we have resourceful beliefs. And these resourceful beliefs are great because they create some movement, they allow you to get started, it's you've moved some of the blockages. And when you start to bring more resourceful beliefs into place, you start to see change in your life or in the area that you're working in. But then we have this other area of beliefs that I call unconventional beliefs. And these are quite a bit different. And when you start playing in this space, you start to really, really change your reality. And I love in my business working with the people who really want to work with unconventional beliefs. It's a much more bold and courageous way to look at your life or whatever you're trying to change. Because these are the beliefs that really create generative solutions. They really expand, they really change what is possible, and they give us a very different space for us to play in. And so these are the people that are going to create real change. If you're looking for just incremental change and improvement to your life, some really good resourceful beliefs is great. But if you're like, I actually really want to change everything, I want to shift it over here, I want to innovate in a completely different way, you've got to come into the space of unconventional belief. You think about someone like Elon Musk, that man doesn't just have resourceful beliefs, that man has unconventional beliefs. If you think about the people who went, hey, we could go to the moon, they had completely unconventional beliefs about what was possible. And it really is the cornerstone of what you can pull, the thread that you can pull, rather than playing around at a process level. So we've had a quick chat about you guys. Are any of you guys in corporate? Are any of you guys in corporate? Do you work in a big corporate out of interest? No?
We used to work with big corporate.
Okay, so you're very familiar. So my old world, before I left my career almost 7 years ago, was I was a brand and culture strategist. So I used to go in, I'd work with leadership teams, and the conversation was, if this is the business strategy, what is a culture we've got to drop that into to be successful? And so that conversation pretty much always ended up in a space of how do we create a culture of innovation. And unfortunately, a lot of that conversation comes down to what processes can we put in place? Can we put an innovation space in? How do we create resourceful beliefs around innovation as a concept? But most of the time, it doesn't actually foster the creation of the truly unconventional beliefs that really, really change things. So what I want you to understand is that within a belief system, you've got a whole set of stuff that becomes accessible to you, whether it's behaviours and spaces that you can play in. So I moved to Australia 11 years ago. Interestingly, I'm leaving Australia on Monday. So I've become a citizen. We've done the whole visa process. I've lived in Bondi for 8 years, lived in Byron for almost 4, and I've decided it's time to change. But when I came here 11 years ago, I remember travelling around. I did my due diligence of where I wanted to live, and I did head over to Perth. And of course, 11 years ago was when they decided to start culling sharks over in Perth, right? And if you think about it, if you hold a belief, and it's quite a conventional belief, that sharks are dangerous, you could get to a solution that is culling sharks. Whereas if you don't hold that belief, if you were to hold a belief that was that sharks are highly precious and must be preserved under all circumstances, for argument's sake, which isn't the mainstream belief around sharks, you would never come to a solution that involved culling sharks. So the interesting thing about beliefs is, I say it provides the parameters to our potential. And so the work that I'm fundamentally doing with people is unlocking people's potential. So really what the beliefs do is they give you a space that you can play in. So if you imagine, for example, you've got a house, and let's say you've got a garden out the back. That fence that runs around your garden is really like your beliefs, okay? And so it sets the space that you get to live in and you get to play in. And so you're just out in that garden, in that fencing. It is the parameters of what is possible for you. And therefore, the ideas, the innovations, the resources that you can find all exist in that space. If we actually move your belief systems, if we expand them out into a different space, suddenly you've got a bigger space for you to actually play in, more resources, more ideas. You're able to look at something from a completely different perspective, which is required if you truly, truly want to innovate, because you've got to question the status quo. And if you don't really change it, you just end up in exactly the same spaces again. So when you play with your beliefs, you really start to pull yourself out into other places. And the question often is, well, how important really are beliefs? Like, how much do they actually affect what we can do and what we can create? And they are the ultimate driver of our behavior. You'll notice this is not called the power of unconventional thinking. It's the power of unconventional beliefs. So, you will notice as well, especially if you dig into the personal development world, that people interchange the language that they use. And we actually use a lot of language incorrectly these days. And as a hypnotist, because I'm actually using language very specifically to get subconscious change, I'm a little bit sensitive to people using the incorrect language. And so you will hear people say, I think, I believe, and I feel. And then people swap around what they put after those words. You so often, it's become such a thing now to say, oh, I feel this and I feel that. And you'll notice it now. You'll have friends say to you, oh, I feel this. All they've done is just tell you what they think. They haven't told you what they feel. And there is actually a difference between all of these three things. So when we think something, it's very much the domain of conscious mind. It's fleeting, and what we think doesn't necessarily drive behavior. It's not a good indicator of what will happen next. And then we have stuff that we feel, and we feel in our body. We can't feel with our minds. It's a somatic experience when we feel, okay? It's emotion, it's sensation. It sits below the neck. Now, a belief is something that we think and we feel. Then it becomes a belief. And why this is interesting is because what you find is that when you change the situation, because thoughts are situational, you start to push up against the threshold of your beliefs, and you start to understand actually where these parameters of your potential sit. So let me make that tangible for you. So for example, let's say you sit in a room, a specific room of people, and in that room you say, I'm successful. Yeah, I'm a successful person. And then if I take you out that room, let's say I stick you in a room with the top 100% millionaires in the world, and then you sit in that room and you go, I'm not successful. Then you think you're successful. You don't believe you're successful. Because at a belief level, that doesn't change when we change the environment or we change the circumstance you're in. And this is why things get stuck. This is why people don't make progress. It's because they think something, And who here reads a lot of books, listens to a lot of podcasts, attends a lot of talks and workshops, understands a lot of concept and theory about how to better their life or achieve their goals, and yet somehow you don't really make that much progress? And that's because you don't believe that stuff. It's not truly embodied at a somatic and body level, you just think it. And your conscious mind is only 4%, so it actually doesn't have that much power. It's 96%, which is your subconscious mind, which is actually the motor that is running the show. And it's totally automated. So you're over here going, oh, I'm going to think about, really unconventional things, or I know that I could leave my career and start a business, for argument's sake. And yet all the programming is somebody who's an employee and actually does stuff pretty much like everybody else. And that's why you don't really see the change. And so why this is important is because when you've really got a belief, it deeply changes the behavior. It's deeply rooted. It influences your behavior, how a thought does not, and it's also highly emotionally charged. And if you think about the people who are out there, the trailblazers who are truly innovating in the world, they are powered by deep passion and emotion about the causes that they believe in. And this is why we cultivate unconventional beliefs and not just unconventional thoughts that are fleeting. We also put ourselves into this place where we're deeply powered by our hearts, our bodies, and a desire to really, really create change. And, one of the reasons why I love hypnosis is, and I'm a master hypnotist, I think you perhaps missed that bit before you came in the room, is because we work at that somatic level. And so a lot of people think because we're dealing with beliefs, we're dealing up here in your thoughts, because we have this misunderstanding of thoughts and beliefs and feelings. But actually what we're doing in hypnosis, what I do with people is I'm closing the gap between what they think and what they feel. And when you close that gap somatically and you remove the emotional charge that sits in that gap, that's when people truly embody what it is they really, really want. And it's a really, really powerful experience. And it's actually great just to get you out of your head and get you into your body. Okay, so that gives you a little bit of an idea about beliefs. Now, the thing about unconventional beliefs is they can feel quite off to the side. They can ruffle people's feathers, but what they do is they can completely change your reality, because what we do also know is that there isn't any one reality. There really, really isn't. We are all, come on in, we are all experiencing our little bit of reality. Has anyone here heard about the reticular activating system? You guys would totally be familiar with it, yeah, right? So what it basically is, it's a filter that sits inside us and it filters the information that comes in, okay? So through our senses, every single second, we're getting 6 million bits of information. If that was something we were consciously aware of, we would literally go into overload. We wouldn't be able to process that information. So we have this filter, and what it does is it filters most of that out so that only 134 bits of information actually come through to us through our senses, things that we see, that we hear, etc., that we taste, that we smell. And so our portion of reality is based on that 134 bits that we are personally aware of. And right now, sat in this room, we are not all experiencing the same 134 bits. So there may be some overlap, and if I draw your attention to the aircon and the fans, all of a sudden we're all aware of the sensory information from the fans, but we're all kind of bumbling along in our own little realities. And so this is one of the things that we have to become aware of if we want to really change things, is that our reality is just a tiny part of what is actually happening. And when we start to play with different sensory information and we open up different stuff that's coming into us, that's different stuff in that space, in that garden, resources for us to build our ideas and our solutions on. And so that filter, that reticular activating system, or the RAS, has a number of things that sits in it and filters out that information. It's your values, your experiences, time and space, i.e. if something isn't happening for 2 years, you're not going to get the sensory information because it's not that important. But our beliefs are also a really core part of what sits in there. So if we can change our belief, we can change our experience, and we can change the ideas that we may come up with. For example, let's give you a really tangible one. A kind of standardized belief is that, when you've been in a relationship for a few years, that the sexual charge, that, that tends to go, that you don't want to have sex with each other as much, that it's not as fiery, it's not excitement, it kind of becomes something on the back burner, right? That's just a very standardized belief, but it doesn't have to be reality. Personally, my parents, who've been together 44 years, still have a very, very active sex life. They absolutely fancy the pants off each other, and they're at it several times a week. And they've been together for 43, 44 years. Okay? So actually, that idea that after a certain amount of time, it just dies out, you can choose that reality. But if that's not the most empowering belief, perhaps another one is. And you can see, if you over here and you're like, hey, sexual excitement in my relationship doesn't have to go, your behaviors and the things you're going to do are going to be very different to a person over here who says, but that's just how it is. And some of these things can ruffle people's feathers, right? Because we are so set in our realities and what we think they look like that we don't like it when somebody challenges those realities. But also, when we can start to consider that we might be very wrong, we can come up with better solutions. So about 11 years ago again, actually, I was in Nusa Lembongan, and I was talking to some of these scientists who were working in this conservation society for manta rays. And they were doing this piece of work where they were identifying mantas, and then they were tracking the distances that mantas were traveling. And I don't know if you know this, but I think it's a really cool fact. The markings and the prints on the belly of a manta ray is like a fingerprint for a human. So it's completely individual. So if you photograph the bottom of a manta, you can then identify them wherever they travel. And about 11 years ago, we had a belief that they traveled about 30 miles. Okay, so they will travel about 40 miles. So the efforts in Indonesia to protect mantas was based on the idea that they were only going to be traveling 30 miles. Anyway, someone said, well, what if they actually travel way further? What if everything we think about how they travel is wrong? Turns out they travel hundreds and thousands of miles. And this particular agency pushed through a big bit of change in Indonesia where they got them protected from fishing, not just around Nusa Lembongan in a 30-mile area, but actually in this bigger space. And so you can understand if we'd stuck with believing that they only travel 30 kilometers, 30 miles in distance, you were never going to have a solution that actually protected them. So we have to start to think about things in a completely different way. So the subconscious mind is very, very powerful. Okay, so as I've said, it runs the show. It's 96%. And so what happens when we're in life and we have a new goal, a new idea, a new vision, or perhaps even we want to come up with a new solution, is we create that from our conscious mind. So it's over here, okay? I want to change my career, I want to change my relationship, I want to come up with a solution for this, I want to be healthier, whatever it might be. And then over here we have the subconscious mind that has all of the programming for exactly the life you're living now. You are so well positioned to do your life now, you're an expert on it, totally programmed, all the beliefs for the life you live now. And of course that's not for the new vision or the area that you want to move into. So what you get is this tension. But the subconscious mind says, well, no, we've got the programming and we're going to stay here. It's nice and safe. We know how to do this. But your conscious mind is going, yeah, but I want to do this. I want to create something different. And this is exactly what's happening. This tension is like a tug of war when you feel stuck. And so what we do is we go in and we change the belief sitting in the subconscious mind. We change the programming to line up with the future destination that you'd actually like to go to. And then all of a sudden, the subconscious mind isn't holding you here in this reality, it's actually powering you forward into another reality. And the subconscious mind has a number of prime directives. It's kind of like its top jobs that it needs to do. And the very top job of the subconscious mind is to preserve your identity. So whoever you see yourself as, you are going to be preserving that in every single way possible. So when we want to change something, an identity of who we really are, you can understand why it's a bit tricky. And I'll give you an example that really tends to resonate with people. So you might be this person, or you might know this person, somebody who's always trying to lose a bit of weight. And they never seem to quite lose the weight. Even though they follow the diet plans, they do the exercise, they maybe lose a bit of weight, but they get the weight back. Yeah? Now, that's because the subconscious mind has the power, because it is the body, to regulate all the things that are involved with you losing weight, right? So it can regulate your appetite, your metabolism, your energy levels, so whether you can get your ass out of bed and get down to the gym or not, and you go and do that walk or whatever you need to do. It regulates all of that stuff. And if you have an identity that I'm a fat person, an overweight person, or a person who carries 3 extra pounds, and you truly believe that at identity level, you can go out and take all the actions, but the subconscious mind is regulating everything to keep you in that identity. And so one of the most powerful things in the weight loss space is to actually work on your identity of how you see yourself. Do you see yourself as someone who needs to lose a bit of weight, or do you see yourself as a slim and healthy person? And that's the bit why people constantly keep reverting, even though they know all the behaviours to do, even though they know what needs to happen, and they might be able to do it for a little bit of time, but the subconscious mind always catches up. Okay? So, let's come on to what are the 5 things for you to be aware of if you want to really become a trailblazer and use unconventional beliefs in your life, or to protect the oceans, or whatever it is that you want to work on. Okay, so the first one is that you need to be really curious and open to the idea that you are wrong. Is that the way that you see the world is incorrect, is that it's limited, and it's this tiny portion of reality. You have to be truly flexible to your whole view of the world actually changing. That is the starting point. That is the state that you have to be prepared to show up in. The second one is that I want you to really become aware of a certain type of belief that is holding you back. There is one really insidious type of belief that keeps people super stuck, right? And these are the beliefs that people think are facts. Beliefs are not facts, they are simply your view of the world, right? We can all hold different beliefs about different things, and it's just the question is, is your belief the most empowering belief for the thing you want? But a lot of people hold on so tightly to their beliefs that they become facts, right? And I want to give you an example here of how this can play out. So for some reason, I've worked a lot with construction companies. It's just one of those things that's happened. I've worked with Lend-Lease, I've worked with Multiplex, I've worked with lots of them. The story I'm about to tell you is not about either of those two, but it's about another one that I was working with a few years ago down in Melbourne. And I'd worked with the leadership team for quite a while. They were great guys. The directors really had very, very good intentions. And we were sitting there one day, and the director of this particular construction firm said to me, construction is the most stressful industry, right? Now that's a belief. That's not a fact, right? Lots of people who work in construction, do you work in construction? You're smiling at me, no. But a lot of people that work in construction would say construction is the most stressful industry, but lawyers will tell you that too, and so will dentists. And depending on what source of information you look at, there's a lot of stressful industries, okay? But construction is not the most stressful industry. That's not a fact, but it's a belief. That it's a belief, though, that these particular directors hold so tightly. They've made it fact. So then we're talking about mental health in construction. And if you start to look at the initiatives that they've put in place, which are truly from a good place, but we had, mental health days, we had, meditation, we had mental health first aid put in place, various apps, things, etc., right? And that's all fine, that's all good. But these are all sticky plaster solutions. They don't sort the root cause out, which is actually we need to restructure how construction firms operate and the way we set their people up to perform their jobs. Now, if you believe that construction is the most stressful industry, if you ran a construction company, why on earth would you spend your energy, your resources in trying to solve mental health? Because it predisposes that the stress is always going to be there. So that thought, that belief, actually keeps you stuck in the types of solutions you came up with. Whereas if you were sat there and you ran a construction firm and you said, it's entirely possible that we could still be as commercially successful and our people could have brilliant mental health. Now that's an unconventional thought within construction. You would be open to different possibilities and different innovations in that space. And so what I ask you to do is in your own life is to audit, where have I made a belief a fact? Because this is one of those beliefs that if you can make that unconventional, this will really fundamentally change your experience and your success. And one of the ways you know this is that when somebody challenges you, you dig your heels in and you tell them, but you don't understand. Because when I challenged these particular directors, who I'd been working with for months and who had total faith in me, they said, but Michelle, you still don't work in construction. You don't really understand how construction works. And that's what people say, but you don't understand my life. But this is just the way it is. Notice yourself when you really want to defend that. And this is where things tend to be quite emotionally charged. People really have an emotional response to these beliefs that they've made facts and they deeply want to hold on to them. So that's the second thing. Find the facts, the ones that you've turned beliefs into facts. The third one that I want you to do is I want you to actually really trust your intuition. So Einstein has a quote where he talks about intuition and imagination being more powerful than knowledge in innovation and new ideas. And it's true. And funnily enough, it's cool, thank you for joining me. Funnily enough, intuition is the domain of the body. It's the domain of the subconscious mind. And intuition actually allows us to get a little nod to what some of these unconventional beliefs should be. Because when it comes to our lives, or it comes to the things that we really want to change and impact, we tend to have this little something inside us that says, this is not quite right. This could be different. This could be changed. And intuition is that little nod, is that little spark that can take you on to the unconventional belief that can then create the change. Really, unconventional beliefs are what create our hypotheses about what can change. It's a beautiful place for anyone who's looking to do something different, but certainly a scientist, to go, I have an idea that this might be different to what we think it is. I have a hypothesis, and now I can go out, experiment, and collect the data and the information to drive that. And so again, think about whatever you're working on, your life, where does your intuition whisper to you? Because it can be this source of unconventional beliefs. So for example, with me, so I left my career almost 7 years ago. It'll be 7 years in August that I left that career. And I always had this little thing inside of me that said, we're not supposed to work this way. The whole concept of annual leave to me is bullshit. How can somebody say to you, this is how many weeks a year that you can have complete control over your time? Like, how is that a way to live your life? I just can't buy into that, right? There's so many aspects of working for somebody else or the world that I came from that my body went, this isn't right. I'm working this hard. I'm stressed. I don't have any time to myself. I can't prioritize my well-being. None of this makes sense. My intuition was like, this is not right. And what it ended up spawning was these unconventional beliefs about how I believe business should operate, which means that I now run a business where I make more money than I did as a consultant, and I work 20 hours a week. And I'm able to do it from anywhere because I chose to leave the limiting beliefs about business. I wasn't happy with just the resourceful beliefs about how I could build a business. I was like, I want to do this completely unconventionally. And it's taken me into a very different space. But it's the intuition that was like, Michelle, this isn't right. This is off. And so really, really listen to your intuition. And if you're sat there going, yeah, but I can't really tune into it, and I'm not sure what's my intuition versus just my thoughts getting carried away. Who feels that way? Anyone feel like do you tap into it? Love it. If you can tap into it, that's brilliant. If you do struggle, if you actually find out what your human design is, which is another system that I work with hypnosis, and you can get your body graph free on my website. There's just a big tab that says get your chart. You can pop your details in. In there will also help you learn to tap into your unique type of intuition and how that actually operates for you. So that's the third thing. Tap into your intuition. Trust it. Allow it to actually spawn these unconventional beliefs. The fourth one is start looking for the sensory information that opens up that new reality in line with that unconventional belief. So as I said, the reticulator activating system is showing you a very, very specific set of sensory information, yeah? So for example, if you're like, let's say you have a bit of a belief that this particular person doesn't like you, for argument's sake, then you get all the sensory information that the person doesn't like you. So you notice when they perhaps aren't giving you their full attention, or you might notice some interesting body language that suggests they don't like you. And you might have even had those conversations over the years where you've turned to a friend and you've said, oh, I don't think so-and-so likes me. And your friend's like, what are you talking about? They love you. You're all accessing different information. So then actively look for the other information. If you think something's hard, look for what makes it easy. Yeah? And so on and so forth. Use the sensory information to create the contrast to start to open up this new space for you to innovate and for you to play in. And then the final one of these 5 keys for you to actually trailblaze with unconventional beliefs is to be very ready to actually ruffle people's feathers. Because as I've said, when we have a belief, when we have an idea that's quite far from what people currently think and feel, it creates a lot of emotional charge. But you have to stand in your truth with that to be able to really, really explore it. So be prepared to ruffle people's feathers. Be prepared to stand in your integrity as you explore the potential that sits around that unconventional belief.